Chapter 36. The Quiet Between. The first days after Ethan's return felt like stepping out of a storm and into fragile sunlight. Every sound, every breath, every brush of his hand against mine seemed sharper, more alive, as though the world had been rewoven with delicate threads we didn't dare tug. We spent hours on the back porch, our fingers tangled together, watching the new sapling sway gently in the breeze where the altar once stood. Its leaves, a tender shade of green edged with gold, caught the light like small flames that refused to burn out. I couldn't look at it without feeling the echo of everything we had endured, and yet it was proof that we had survived. Proof that something still lived where so much had died. Ethan rarely let go of my hand. At first I thought it was simple relief, a need for closeness after so much separation. But the way his grip tightened unexpectedly, the way his eyes flicked toward the woods with a guarded sharpness, told me otherwise. He wasn't just holding on because he wanted to. He was holding on because he was afraid of what might happen if he didn't, as if some invisible tether still pulled at him, and I was the only anchor keeping him here. I pretended not to notice, though my heart noticed everything. He spoke less than he used to. His voice, once warm and steady, often came out quieter now, as if words cost him more. Sometimes he would sit for hours in silence, his thumb running over the back of my hand in restless circles, his gaze locked on the horizon. The shadows in his eyes told me he remembered more than he wanted me to know. I didn't press him. Not yet. We were both healing, both learning how to breathe in this new air that felt lighter but not entirely free. Healing wasn't about dragging truths into the open. Sometimes it was about letting silence hold them until they softened. Town had changed, too. Strangers nodded at us when we passed, their smiles easier, their eyes less wary, as if the weight of something unseen had lifted from their shoulders. The air carried no whispers, no restless secrets on the wind. The leaves no longer bled red with every gust. For the first time in months, children played in the streets without looking over their shoulders, and the shopkeepers no longer bolted their doors at dusk. It was as if the forest had finally unclenched its grip on all of us. But peace, I was learning, could hum with its kind of unease. At night, the quiet deepened in strange ways. I began awake from dreams I couldn't remember, my body heavy, my chest tight, as though someone had been calling to me in a language just beyond memory. The feeling clung to me like mist even after I opened my eyes. Some nights, I would roll over only to find Ethan already awake, his body tense, his gaze fixed out the window where the woods swayed in the moonlight. His brows would be drawn tight, his fists clenched at his sides, as if he had been holding himself together for hours. When I asked, he always whispered the same thing. "It's nothing." I wanted to believe him. I almost did. But the way he flinched at the rustle of wind through the trees told me otherwise. The way he avoided the narrow trail leading back to the hollow spoke louder than his words. Whatever the forest had shown him in those final moments, the ones he never spoke about, had carved itself deep into him. It hadn't let go, and I could feel it pressing against us like a shadow we couldn't quite shake. The sapling became our silent witness. Each morning I would find it leaning ever so slightly toward the porch, its leaves trembling as though it knew we were watching. Its roots seemed restless, curling in strange patterns through the soil, reaching farther than they should have so soon. When I walked past, I could feel something pulse faintly under my feet, like a heartbeat just beneath the earth. Sometimes, when the wind was still, the branches would tilt toward me, almost as though they were listening. Ethan noticed it too, though he said nothing. His silence was answer enough. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, I stood by the sapling and pressed my palm against its fragile trunk. The bark was smooth, but beneath it I felt something alive, alert, aware. It thrummed faintly against my skin, and in that moment I knew the forest hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its form. The altar was gone, but its memory lived on in this small, fragile thing. And perhaps in us, too. When I told Ethan, he shook his head gently, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It remembers," he said quietly, echoing the words he had spoken that first day back. His hand came to rest over mine, pressing against the bark. His eyes lingered on the leaves above us, and for a moment I thought he looked like himself again, steady, whole. But then the shadows flickered back, and I knew the weight hadn't left him. Not fully. Nights stretched long. I began to count the stars again, a habit I had long forgotten. Ethan would sit beside me, our shoulders touching, his silence heavy with thoughts he couldn't speak. Sometimes he would drift into sleep with his head against mine, his breathing uneven, his body tense even in dreams. I would stay awake, staring at the sapling swaying in the dark, feeling the strange hum that lingered just beneath the quiet. It was in those moments, between his breaths and the creak of the porch boards, that I realized something undeniable. The forest hadn't finished with us. The silence wasn't an ending. It was a pause. A space between one story and another, a breath held before the world exhaled again. And though I longed to believe we were free, a part of me knew better. Some threads don't cut so easily. Some roots go deeper than we can see. But for now, I leaned into the warmth of Ethan's shoulder and let the night hold us. The quiet was all we had, and until the forest chose to speak again, I would take it. Chapter 37. The Man from Nowhere. The knock came just as the sky began to bruise with dusk, a quiet yet deliberate sound that carried weight in its restraint. I hesitated before opening the door, something in the rhythm of it already setting my heart on edge. When I pulled it open, a man stood framed against the fading light. He was tall and almost unsettlingly lean, his dark gray suit pressed and perfect in a way that didn't match the sleepy quiet of our town. His skin held no warmth, and his eyes, pale, stripped of color, were the kind that seemed to look through rather than at. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply regarded me with the silence of someone who already knew the answer to every question I hadn't asked. Ray Winslow. His voice flowed out smooth and low, like water sliding over stone, calm but carrying a weight that pressed against my chest. My name spoken like a fact, not a question. I nodded, my throat dry, though something in me screamed not to acknowledge him. His gaze shifted then, drifting past me as if I were merely a doorway, settling instead on the line of trees beyond the porch. His lips curled slightly, not quite a smile, more like recognition. "You finished the ritual," he murmured. "Impressive. Most don't survive it." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. My fingers curled tightly around the doorframe as I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" I asked, though even as the words left me, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The air had grown heavier since his arrival, pressing in as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The man tilted his head, studying me like one might study a specimen pinned beneath glass. "Someone who remembers," he said simply. "Someone who's seen what the forest truly is." His tone was devoid of boasting, spoken more like a fact etched in the marrow of his bones. Behind me, the sound of movement, Ethan's footsteps approaching, his presence filling the doorway with a sudden, bristling tension. He stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against the small of my back as though anchoring me, his jaw set tight. "You need to leave," Ethan said, his voice low and firm, each word edged with warning. The stranger's eyes slid to him with a cold precision. His glance was sharp, dissecting, and for a heartbeat it felt like a blade had been drawn between them. "Ah," he said softly, as though uncovering a secret. "The echo brought back. You shouldn't exist outside the cycle." His tone carried no surprise, only a strange kind of inevitability, as if he had expected this but found it curious all the same. "That makes things unstable." Ethan stiffened, but before he could speak, I stepped forward, positioning myself between them. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I met the pale gaze head-on. "What do you want?" I asked, though the cold certainty in my gut told me it wouldn't be something I could give freely. His expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to pulse, humming with an energy that wasn't human. "Only to watch," he said, "to see if you're strong enough to hold the forest's memory without breaking. Because if you're not—" His eyes shifted again toward the yard, to the young sapling rooted where the altar once had been. Its branches swayed violently, though the air was still, the leaves quivering as though caught in an unseen storm. "The forest will take it back." The words lingered like frost, chilling even after the sound had faded. I turned toward the sapling, its small frame bowing and trembling under the weight of some invisible hand. My pulse quickened, the rhythm syncing with the thrashing of its branches. By the time I looked back at the porch, the man was already descending the steps, his figure stretching long against the dim light. He didn't hurry. He didn't glance back. He simply moved, vanishing down the road with a pace so measured it felt unnatural. And then, as the last streaks of sunlight disappeared, so did he, like a shadow unraveling at dawn. But the silence he left behind was not peace. It was the silence of a storm gathering far off, creeping closer, waiting to be named. Chapter 38. Unearthed. Night had fallen like a heavy curtain over the woods, and the air was thick with the damp scent of earth and pine. Ethan and I moved silently toward the shed behind Gran's cottage, our flashlights cutting swaths of pale gold through the darkness. Each step felt charged, like the ground itself was holding its breath, waiting for what we were about to uncover. Gran's shed had always seemed ordinary, cluttered with tools and forgotten trinkets, but tonight it was different. It felt alive, like it was guarding a secret it had kept for generations. We discovered the false floor almost by accident, a loose plank hidden beneath decades of dust and neglect. Ethan knelt and pried it open, the hinges groaning under the weight of years. Beneath it, a small chest lay wedged into the shadows, sealed with hardened wax and draped in a delicate web of moss. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, as if touching it would awaken something ancient. The chest opened with a soft pop, and the smell of old paper and time rolled out like a whispered warning. Inside, dozens of journals rested, each bound in cracked leather, each page whispering the lives of women who had come before me. I pulled one carefully from the pile, brushing away the dust. These were not just Gran's memories, but a lineage of Winslows who had lived and suffered under the forest's unyielding shadow. Each journal told of choices forced, of sacrifices made, of consequences carried silently for decades. As I flipped the brittle pages, one entry from 1911 caught my eye. The script was spidery, deliberate. The forest remembers not in kindness, but in continuity. Those who defy its terms are marked. The tree chooses its next guardian the moment the last one bleeds. The words landed in the pit of my stomach with the weight of inevitability. Ethan's hand found mine across the chest, and I felt the tremor of his pain as he read the same passage. His eyes, normally so guarded, flared with anguish, and I could see the memory of centuries pressing down on him as if he were bearing all of it at once. "You weren't supposed to take my place," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it echoed through the small space like a warning. I turned to him, my own heart breaking at the sight of him, and pressed my forehead to his shoulder. "But I did," I said softly, the words trembling yet certain. "Because I love you." The declaration felt both fragile and fierce, a small defiance against the inevitability the forest demanded. For hours, we pored over the journals, reading by the narrow light of our flashlights, tracing a lineage of sorrow that had never truly been healed. Each woman, each guardian, had carried part of the curse alone, shaping the town with her silence, leaving behind pieces of themselves in cryptic passages and half-finished confessions. The patterns emerged slowly, like roots twisting through soil. The forest never forgot, never forgave, and yet never acted without purpose. As the night deepened, I realized the terrible truth. The final voice rested in me, the last witness, and the weight of all that pain, all those choices, pressed down like stones on my chest. I looked at Ethan, at the quiet strength and the sorrow in his eyes, and knew that unless I found a way to break the cycle, all of it, the forest, the lineage, the town, would demand its due once more. The journals whispered in the darkness, urging me to remember, to act, to decide. And in that moment, beneath the low hum of the sleeping woods, I made a vow. I would not let history repeat itself. I would not allow love to be a sacrifice. Somehow I would end it, for all of us. Chapter 39. When the leaves blushed again. Autumn arrived with a force that stole the breath from the town. The leaves erupted into fire-red flames, more vivid than anyone could remember, and the air carried a sharp bite that made the skin tingle. People whispered to one another, some marveling at the spectacle, others uneasy, sensing that the beauty was too precise, too deliberate. I felt it immediately. The forest was awakening again, probing, testing me in ways I didn't fully understand. Each rustle of leaves, each shifting shadow, carried a weight of expectation. The sapling had grown more than a foot in just a month. Its trunk was no longer the smooth, fragile thing I had first touched. It was marked, etched with carvings that weren't mine. Symbols I had only seen on the altar, shapes that felt older than the town itself. Ethan and I stood beneath it, shoulders tense, staring upward as if the very canopy above us might respond. "Maybe it's not a warning," Ethan murmured, his hand brushing against the bark, fingers trembling. "Maybe it's a question." I ran my hand over the carved symbols, feeling the grooves press into my skin. A shiver ran down my spine. "Then let's answer it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The words felt like a challenge, a promise, and a prayer all at once. Night fell like a velvet curtain, and we returned to the hollow, the weight of the forest pressing down around us. Each step toward the sapling felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted our approach. The moon hung low, casting silver light that made the red leaves glow with an almost unnatural intensity. The sapling looked older now, twisted with age, as if decades had passed in hours. I pressed my palm against its trunk, and the moment I did, a jolt surged through me. My vision shattered into fragments. Flames licking at shadowed walls, Elia's face twisted in pain and fury, Gran's last moments replaying like a memory stitched into my very soul. Then, amid the chaos of images, something new appeared, an anomaly hidden beneath the roots, almost invisible. A door. Wooden, small, carved with symbols that mirrored the ones etched into the sapling. It lay beneath the altar site, waiting, silent, secret. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. Ethan's arms wrapped around me before I hit the ground, steadying me. His eyes were wide with concern, reflecting both fear and wonder. "Ray, what did you see?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper against the rustling leaves. I met his gaze, my chest heaving, the images of fire and grief still dancing behind my eyes. "An ending," I breathed, my fingers brushing the sapling's trunk once more. "Or a beginning." The words felt like a threshold, a hinge swinging between everything we had known and the impossible path the forest was offering us. And in the moonlit hollow, the wind through the red leaves seemed to answer, whispering that the choice and the danger lay ahead. Chapter 40. The Door Beneath. It took every ounce of our strength to clear the soil. Daylight slipped away as our hands clawed at the earth beneath the altar site, fingers raw, nails caked with mud. The vision had been precise, an exact spot, a place hidden beneath centuries of forgotten layers, but knowing where to dig and finding it were two entirely different things. Finally, our hands scraped against something solid. Wood. A door, round and ancient, pressed against the weight of roots that had grown over it like the veins of the forest itself. We worked tirelessly, cutting and pulling at the roots, sweat and dirt streaking our faces, hearts hammering with both dread and anticipation. When the door groaned open at last, the world seemed to exhale with us. A warm, damp breath of air escaped the hidden chamber, carrying the scent of pine, wet earth, and something older, memory itself, layered over decades, centuries, lingering like a faint heartbeat. Beyond the threshold lay a staircase, narrow and winding, carved from stone and earth, descending into darkness so thick it felt alive. We lit a single lantern, its flame trembling as if nervous, casting shadows that leapt and flickered on the walls. Each step echoed sharply, like footsteps in a long-forgotten cathedral, hollow and reverent. Silence wrapped around us, and even our breathing seemed intrusive, as though the earth itself demanded quiet. At last, the stairs opened into a cavern, vast and echoing, shaped by time and secret intention. At the center, a pool stretched out, perfectly still. Its surface shimmered with a faint, blood-red glow light refracting across the jagged walls in ghostly patterns. Around the pool stood mirrors, tall, fractured, reflecting our faces in jagged, impossible angles, twisting our features into something strange and otherworldly. I shivered, the reflection of myself unrecognizable, almost as if the forest had already begun to rewrite who I was. And there, at the very center of the pool, a tree grew. A miniature echo of the sapling above, perfectly formed, its branches heavy with crimson leaves that drifted gently to the water's surface, spinning in delicate circles. It was alive, radiant, and ancient in a way that made my chest tighten. I reached toward it, as if my touch might tether all the visions and sacrifices together, and yet something held me back. "This is it," I whispered, voice trembling, awe and fear mingling in the echoing chamber. "The root of it all." Ethan's hand found mine, grounding me, his eyes wide with the same mixture of wonder and terror. We weren't just observers anymore. The forest hadn't simply watched us from afar. It had seeped into our bones, threading its memory through our blood, shaping us into extensions of its will. It had been becoming us, as much as we had been trying to understand it. The air in the chamber pulsed softly, as if alive, waiting for a choice, a surrender, or a command. And in that still, red-lit water with our reflections fractured across mirrors and shadows, I understood. Whatever came next, it would not just change the forest. It would change us.